The angel has spread its wings. The time has come for better things.
This story is something that happened to me when I was in middle school. Beside my bed was a desk and a chair, and at the foot of my bed was a large standing lamp. Sometimes while I was sleeping, I would accidentally kick the lamp with my foot, and thankfully, it was really heavy, so it never fell over, but it would wobble. One night I dreamt that a man dressed in very old-fashioned clothing, maybe 18th century, was sitting at my desk and woke me up. I didn't feel threatened or in danger, and I asked him who he was and why he was there. He only smiled at me and said,
Be careful.
while pointing to my lamp. After he said that, I woke up to a really loud shattering of glass. I guess I had kicked the lamp over, and this time it fell. The lamp missed my face by only mere inches. The headboard caused all the glass to shatter around my head. If that lamp had landed on my face, I would have been seriously injured. After that incident and that dream, I finally moved the lamp away from my bed. This mysterious man has shown up a couple of more times throughout my childhood. I felt like he was making sure I was okay. I once caught a glimpse of him walking past my classroom while I was at school. Considering what he was wearing, I thought people would immediately notice him, but no one ever seemed to see him, except for me. It was only when I grew older that I realized he might have been a ghost, spirit, or an entity of some kind. Haven't seen him since. Here's an experience I had in Tokyo. A friend of mine and I were visiting his old high school one early afternoon. After a while, we got hot and sat on the curb. Just as we sat down, out of the corner of our eye, we both saw a completely burnt and blackened old woman, wearing filthy tattered clothes, quickly scurry across the street on all fours and disappeared into some bushes. We both jumped and screamed at the same time, and honestly, if my friend wasn't there, I would have thought I went batshit crazy. We both saw the same thing, and even our physical descriptions were the same. We considered that it could have been a giant bear or wolf, but we both said it looked like some weird woman creature thing. We got out of there real fast, and we still talk about it sometimes. I have two stories that are not so scary, but today I still have no answers to. To get into context, my grandmother lives in a rural area, so the houses are very far apart. It is hard to be heard. But she lives in a clearing, so if someone approaches, you will notice. I was at my maternal grandmother's house with a couple of my cousins, my uncles and my mother. The older ones went to a funeral and left us alone because we didn't want to go. It was close to 10 p.m. and my cousins and I lock ourselves in a room to have a sleepover in one of the rooms that has a door leading to one of the corridors. Going back to the story, everything was dark out there. We kept talking and having a good time until I realized the discomfort of the chickens. My grandmother raises them, and when they are alarmed, they have something like a distinctive sound. So my cousins also realized that something was getting strange. We all kept silent, and one of my cousins ran to turn off the light in the room. We were silent for a long time, for about 20 minutes, and suddenly we heard something walking on the ceiling. And that's when the chickens made the biggest fuss. That something seemed to be very heavy because of the footsteps it made, and little by little, according to the sound made with its footsteps, we realized it was going to the door of the room. But suddenly, it stopped walking. It ran dry, and luckily, we heard a car approaching. They found us, embracing each other, scared, but none preferred to bring up the subject or tell anyone else. To this day, I keep asking what it was that was haunting us. This next story happened where I lived in part of my childhood. In the colony, here in my country we call them colonies, where I lived, every night an animal was heard running on the roofs. All the neighbors ruled out that it was caused by cats because they are not so heavy or big to make that heavy jumping sound. But in the end, we all came to a conclusion as to who would be to blame. A lady who lived alone near a stream. Many neighbors said they saw her doing strange things, and adding that she did not tell anyone or the neighbors, that she was a type of witch or something similar due to the strange events that were related to her. Those sounds were always heard at the same time and every day, and they were only heard when the lady was going to visit distant relatives. But the day she died, the noises and strange things that happened with her disappeared, and that is why they nicknamed her La Bruja. I'm a preacher's kid. I grew up with my mum, dad, and older brother. Most of my life I lived in a parsonage. A parsonage is a house provided by the church to the preacher and his family. Contrary to popular belief, ministers make very little, unless you're Joel Osteen or preach at a megachurch. Preachers make just above the poverty line. That's why I knew it was a calling for my dad. I definitely knew he wasn't in it for the money. But I'm not here to push my religious beliefs, or win you over to the virtues of my family. I'm here to tell you about the haunting. I will be touching on religious topics, but only where the story demands it for context. My family moved into the parsonage in the late 90s when I was 10. I fully believe there were dark things already waiting there for me. I'm in my 30s now, and I still look back on those times with absolute terror. This was before Zach Baggins told us about EVPs and residual hauntings. Before the Paranormal Activity franchise made my story cliché. And before YouTubers had list videos about the types of haunting. And before I knew that the first signs of a demonic haunting is the appearance of shadow people. Like I said, I'm an adult now. I've done my research. I've tried to debunk everything. Part of me sincerely hopes it isn't real. I wish a doctor would have diagnosed me with a mental disorder that caused hallucinations. I wish I would have found out my room was getting too much carbon monoxide. I wish there was an actual human intruder secretly living in the attic. Because the alternative is too much. It's too dark. I had to grow up fast, or I would have been consumed by the abyss of nihilism. I was only 10 years old, dealing with ageless, hateful entities. I believe this creature was already there at the parsonage when we moved in. Maybe somebody knew it was for preachers, and they put a curse on it. Now it was just laying dormant, waiting for something to call it, to channel it. So now we need to talk about the movie Event Horizon. I'm not saying the sci-fi movie directed by Paul W.S. Anderson is an evil movie. I just think the darkness at my house used the movie. Like how spirits use a seance or Ouija board to grow stronger. It used my fear of the movie to manifest itself. My parents knew the negative consequences of keeping their kids sheltered for too long. My parents knew being too strict would have the opposite effect on us when we left the house. They didn't want to let us become adults being naive, with no self-control. We would bolt towards bad decisions like a dog finally let off his chain. So I grew up on Terminator 2, edited for TV Jason movies, and all the diehards, also edited for TV. I loved the Aliens and the Predator movies, and Doom 64 was my favorite game on my Nintendo. So you can see why me and my brother wanted to rent Event Horizon after seeing the previews, which makes you think aliens are the bad guys. Well, spoilers for a 20-year-old movie, it's not aliens. It's hell. Like the literal hell from the Bible. Think of the horrors of the warp from Warhammer 40k. I won't spoil it any further for those wanting to see the film, but there's one scene in particular that effed me up. If you've seen the film, you know the scene I'm talking about. The scene shows people being tortured in hell. I actually love the movie now, and I own the Blu-ray, but that scene scared the shit out of 10-year-old me. I shrugged it off pretty cool like in front of my older brother, until nighttime came. Once again, I started thinking about that movie, that scene. My young mind started questioning everything with Sunday school logic. Do people really go to hell? Is that what it's like? What if we all go to hell? What if I do? How do I even comprehend eternity? What if there is no heaven, only the darkness afterward, only hell? I was having an existential crisis before I hit puberty. This wasn't like all the other spooky movies I had been scared by. This was crushing. And then the physical things started happening. My eyes wouldn't adjust to the lack of light in my room. There was pitch black darkness all around me. I started to shiver in my bed because it was cold all of a sudden. I felt cold tendrils snaking up my leg, chest, and finally shoulders. Me and my brother shared the same room, but I was too scared to call out for him. It felt like the darkness was right in front of my face. I felt like something in the darkness would lash out and bite me, like a snarling wolf hovering over its prey. Somehow in my shivering, terrified state, I fell asleep. The dream I had was vivid and grim. In my dream, I was standing naked in a forest. A great tree stood in front of me. It stretched high into the sky like a building. I could see dots of color up in its green tree limbs. It was bearing fruit. I knew, like you do in dreams, that I was in the Garden of Eden, and this was the tree of knowledge, of good and evil. Beside me stood Adam and Eve, both naked and afraid. That's when I noticed I was naked and cold and scared also. I could feel the cold wind against my skin. Suddenly, vines shot up the tree. Giant Jack-and-the-Beanstalk vines, with giant foot-long thorns protruding outwards from them. The vines spiraled all the way up the tree, strangling it. The thorns on the vines jutted out in every angle, making the vines impossible to climb. I saw glistening liquid dripping from the tips of the thorns. Somehow, I just knew it was poison and would kill me on contact. Then, I heard a voice from far up in the tree. Adam and Eve and I looked up to see a gigantic snake staring down from the tree branches. The snake's massive red eyes glowing down at us like spotlights.
No salvation for you.
The snake hissed down at us, venom in its voice.
God has forsaken you, and we will burn together.
I woke up shaking and terrified. But unlike most dreams that fade upon waking, I felt the nightmare grow stronger upon waking. I felt like there was a presence in the room with me now. Think of the feeling you got when your teacher asked you to do a problem on the chalkboard, and you could feel the entire class staring at your back. Or when you walk by a yard with an aggressive dog in it, the dog only kept away by a fence. You could feel the violent intent directed towards you. You can feel the eyes on you. It felt like it was in my closet, or in the dark corner, or maybe on the roof above me, or it could be peeking at me from the foot of my bed. This night was when the waking nightmare began. I was scared all the time. There always felt like a malicious presence was around me. I was always cold and lethargic. The cold was a lonely cold. I felt like hope had been stripped from me. I could not think of anything happy or warm. My optimistic childhood mindset had been ripped out of me. No matter how much I tried, my mind always returned to the hopeless and lost feeling. I just didn't have the mental maturity to fight through it. From what I can recall, this went on for at least 6 months. My parents noticed something was different, and when I told them how I felt, they just thought I had been spooked by a scary movie and I would get over it. So a couple of lonely and scared months passed. I talked rarely and always wanted to be around someone, so I didn't feel alone with the presence. I think I started getting better when summer ended and I went back to school. For most of the day, I was surrounded by classmates and friends. But the darkness always returned to my heart when I got home. Soon as I crossed the threshold, it felt like the cold weight of despair had dropped inside my stomach, making me weak and sullen. Finally, my brain started telling me I wasn't in danger. I always felt like I was about to be hurt, like I was a prisoner with a guillotine hanging over my head. But after months I realized there was no danger, only the feelings of dread. I started trying to take back my life. I started to ignore the unyielding feeling of despair and emptiness, but this only made things worse. YouTube, Google, and even MySpace weren't a thing yet. There was nobody to teach me about hauntings, and nobody who would really listen. And most of all, there was nobody to teach me about shadow people. I think ignoring whatever entity upset it. Like a petulant child, it wanted all my attention. So it started acting out more. It started trying to get me afraid again. It began trying to steal my joy. It was trying to get me to think about it every day, trying to get me to worship it in its own vile way. So let me set the scene for you. The hallway outside my room ran to a small foyer area, where the front door was located. From the foyer, you had 2 options: the doorway to the left that ran through the living room, or the door on your right that led through a dining room area. From each of these rooms, you could continue into the kitchen and the side entrance. Also, during this time, there was a string of burglaries and auto burglaries in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was on high alert, and my dad feared our house was too vulnerable because the side entrance had a door with a big glass window. My dad feared a burglar could easily look in to see everything and break the window to unlock the door. I was 12 at this time. I was a scrawny, acne-ridden kid, and I knew it. So I had a plan if I saw a burglar. I would yell in a deep voice, pretending to be bigger and tougher than I was. So keep that in mind. I always would walk through the living room when going to the kitchen. The lights in the living room needed to be replaced, so they would flicker a couple of times before turning on. I hated that, because every time I hit the switch, I swear I could see something moving in the darkness. Then the light would come on to reveal nothing. During the strobe effect, I would only see the figure when it was dark. The figure would duck behind the couch, be sitting on the love seat or crouched on the carpet. All this kept up for weeks. I didn't want to think it was supernatural. I wanted it to be a trick of the light. I wanted all the spirit stuff behind me. I wanted to grow up and not be afraid of silly things like ghosts and demons. But it got to the point that I would look down as the light blinked and only lifted my head once it fully clicked on. One night I didn't look down. I was back in my parents' room, talking with my dad. He suddenly asked me to get him a soda from the kitchen. I was in a good mood and in a hurry to get back to the conversation with my dad. I ran and flicked on the light, looking straight ahead. As the light flickered on and off, I saw the pure black outline of a 7-foot-tall man. It stood in the middle of the room facing me head-on, like it was challenging me. What made this different was when the light was on, it didn't disappear. And when the light was off, I could still see its black outline against the darkness around it. Think of it this way. Take a cardboard cutout of a person, spray paint it black, and put it in a non-lit room. The dark cutout would still stand out against its surrounding. You still would be able to see it because it was darker than its surroundings. The thing just stood there, blacker than black, flaunting its existence to me. Being confronted with this, my brain screamed, "It's real, it's really here, so it has to be a burglar." In my fake deep voice, I screamed, "Hey asshole, what are you doing in here?" The thing stood there for a while, and I was hit with the sudden realization that it wasn't a man, but a featureless shadow. It slowly floated backwards, never turning from me as the light flickered. It eventually drifted around the corner into the kitchen and out of my view. Only then did the lights turn on. My dad heard me scream and came running. I told him I saw a person, so I wouldn't look crazy. My dad searched the house and checked the side door. The door was still locked. Let's just say that my parents didn't take me very serious with the spooky stuff. It was only 10 years later that my mum admitted something supernatural was happening. But that's its own story. And my dad half admitted that the house felt different. Even now, I can't explain it. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or had mental problems. I'm not saying these things are a blessing, but at least I could get medication or do something to help end the nightmare. I don't want any of this to be real. I hope one day I can debunk all of it. I never saw the shadow people anywhere else but the parsonage. And worst of all, family and friends started seeing them too. I have a lot more stories in the parsonage. I'm willing to share them if there is any interest. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. A huge thank you to the authors of these stories for sending them to my email to share on my channel. I really do appreciate it. If you have a story you'd like to share on my channel, feel free to send it along to my email as well. It's in the description below. As always, thank you so much for your continued support. I really do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa